Mika, my sword is yours.
What? I started Green Hill Zone? They didn't even let me go back to my original level.
Terrible. You have to you need to stop singing out loud until you need to turn off your sound.
Oh.
Hashtag gamer girl.
Dee.
Alright, 10th graders, welcome to the last lecture of period 4. You guys have been doing a great job during this review. This will tie together all the information we need to know for period 4. We'll be moving on to period 5 on Friday. As a reminder, we're going to be having a quiz on Thursday over period 3 and 4 information. So making sure you're taking those good notes you can use on that test. With that in mind, we are going to look at basically a pretty broad topic, but changing faiths. Period 4, we saw a lot of new empires, a lot of exploration, and groups of people meeting each other and mixing that have never mixed before, which is of course going to lead towards different versions of faiths and changes within faiths. The Catholic faith in Latin America, where they took parts of native faith and part of African tribal faiths and mixed them to create a special version of Catholicism known as Latin American Catholicism. We're going to be looking at some more specific examples of how faiths change and how these changing of faiths often intertwine with local cultural, political changes as well. Cool. We're going to start with one of the big ones, the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation went from 1517 to 1648. So first, some context or background. First thing we want to remember is that when we're talking about the faith of Christianity, just like many faiths, there are a lot of different versions of Christianity. Before the Protestant Reformation, there are only a few types of Christianity around. We call these sects. One was the one we know the best, which is Catholicism. Another is Orthodox Christianity, which was followed by the Byzantine Empire, and then later the Russian Empire. There's also a version called Coptic Christianity, which is practiced in Egypt, East Africa, and the Middle East. The Protestant Reformation, though, is going to cause one of the greatest changes within Christianity. Now, continuing our context, what we need to know is that the Catholic Church is one of the most powerful versions of Christianity in the world, and by far has the most followers. It is centered in Europe, and throughout the time of the fall of the Roman Empire, all the way until this time period, the Catholic Church has not only been pretty much the central faith of Europe, it's also had a huge political role as well. The leader of the Catholic Church, the Pope, often was just as an important figure in the lives of everyday Europeans as much as their local lord or their king. Popes, remember the leader of the Catholic Church, popes often had a lot of power to make kings make certain decisions, and the Catholic Church was something that truly united all Europeans under that faith. As well as having the Pope as a figure that rivaled kings in power, the church itself, the Catholic Church itself, has a huge infrastructure and bureaucracy, with bishops who ran whole regions, and then local priests who often were one of the most important figures in local communities. So this Catholic Church, if you were to consider the two most powerful groups in Europe, one would be the actual kings and local governments. The other would be the Catholic Church with its own hierarchy. Our last piece of context is some issues that the Catholic Church starts running into. As we know, Christianity started as a faith of the poor. Its whole point was that people were supposed to love each other, treat your neighbor, even treat your enemy with kindness. And it was a faith that was mostly geared towards the poor as a way to find salvation, no matter what your background is. The issues that the Catholic Church started running into is that it started to kind of ignore its own teaching. Specifically, some issues that people started to see as one, major corruption. Popes started to have immense wealth. Priests and bishops as well were also at times abusing their power to keep wealth. People often donate money to the church. The church also had a lot of lands, which are supposed to be in the purpose of helping keep the Catholic Church around, but instead were starting to become abused as bishops, priests, and the Pope himself was keeping a lot of this money and living with immense wealth. Instead of having that poverty and that humbleness to use that money to help people, they're often keeping it and just using it to enrich themselves. Another issue that was often seen was that popes and the Catholic Church themselves, another issue that was seen is the Catholic Church and the Pope often played a huge political role. And many European kings did not like that. They believed the whole point of the church was just to help people find salvation, not to actually rule them like a king. With that in mind, one of the biggest issues that's going to come around is indulgences. the Catholic Church often needed a lot of money because they often were building these huge churches that often had elaborate decorations and were very, very expensive. One way that the church often financed the buildings that it made and things like that is through indulgences. Indulgences is when a person could pay the Catholic Church to basically wipe away any sin that they had or any of their dead relatives had. So someone could basically give the Catholic Church money, and the Catholic Church would sign a paper that says that their dad or their mom or they themselves had been absolved of all sins. Now, this was of course seen as very, very unfair, both that the rich thus could cleanse their souls better than anyone else, but also seemed like an abuse of power that the Catholic Church was using. What happened was a man named Martin Luther, a Catholic monk, saw these indulgences and the issues of corruption that I talked about and said that this wasn't right. He posted this thing called the 95 Thesis. The 95 Thesis was an argument about how the Catholic Church should change. Because originally, Martin Luther was not trying to create a whole new version of Christianity. He just wanted to fix Catholicism. In the end, though, Martin Luther's changes that he wanted were picked up and were followed by thousands to then millions of Europeans. It became its own version of Christianity. Today, we know it as Protestantism. Protestantism is basically its own separate version with many, many, many different branches of Christianity from there. Now, let's look at these differences so we get a basic understanding. The easiest way to think about it is that Protestants believe that people should, on their own, read the Bible and basically have their own connection with God. Luther's biggest and most important idea was that you did not need the Catholic Church, you did not need the Pope, you did not need bishops, that you yourself are, in your connection with God, was how you gained freedom, and was how you gained salvation. You did not need to donate money, you did not need to do all these good works. How you prayed and found salvation to the Bible is the most important thing. Now, what this meant, though, is that if Martin Luther is right, you don't need the Catholic Church. And, of course, the Catholic Church is going to be really upset by that. I'm also going to post up on the screen right now a whole chart of differences. But the basic idea is that if you're Protestant, you don't believe in all these things that the Catholic Church wants. It's just about you, the Bible, and your relationship with Jesus and God. Now, the support and spread of Protestantism. The reason, there's been different versions of Christianity, but they were often destroyed by the Catholic Church. Why did Protestantism succeed? Well, one, since Martin Luther's version basically advocated to not listen to the Catholic Church, there are many European rulers who said, well, I would rather follow Protestantism, and then I don't have to worry about the Pope anymore. So many European leaders started to themselves follow Protestantism to kind of get away from the power of the Catholic Church. If they follow Protestantism, they could thus take church lands. They no longer had to pay taxes or extra money to the church, and they didn't have to do what the Pope said. And it gave them a lot more power. This started specifically in what we now know today as Germany, but back then it was called the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire had many, many, many different rulers, and basically they saw it as their way. These like little rulers of these tiny kingdoms saw Protestantism as their way of saying like why they should rule, and they didn't have to listen to either the Holy Roman Emperor or the Pope. I know that seems like a lot, but the basic idea you need to get from this is that kings and rulers started to follow Protestantism to increase their own power and not have to listen to the Catholic Church. This also meant that if a king converted to changed over to the Protestant version of Christianity, all his people were supposed to as well. The Protestant version of Christianity also spread quickly because of the printing press. Martin Luther's big goal was that he took the Bible, which was at that time basically only written in Latin, and made it that really only priests were able to read it. The average person did not read the Bible back then. What he did is that he changed and translated the Bible to Common German. This caused the Bible to then be translated to common languages throughout Europe: French, English, what may you. With the printing press, people can now print out all of these Bibles that were translated into common languages that allowed people to then read the Bible on their own and thus follow the tenets of Protestantism. What this is going to cause within Europe is a pretty big deal. This is going to split Europe, which used to have this unity based on the Catholic Church, into a lot of different versions of Christianity. This is going to cause also a lot of wars and conflicts between people as they fight over which version of Christianity is the best. But overall, Martin Luther's main goal was that people adhere closer to the Bible and that religious figures basically keep out of government and don't really focus on telling people what to do in that way, but to basically help people find salvation. With that, we go to Catholic. We're going to pause there. With that, we're going to pause there, and you're going to answer your first question. Go for it. Okay, you've answered that first question. We're going to move on to our second section. This is going to be much shorter. Catholic Reformation. So with the Protestant Reformation, the Catholic Church, of course, is not going to sit there and be like, well, guess everything's okay. The Catholic Church goes through a lot of changes itself. We're going to keep this part pretty short because there's basically only a few main points you need to know. One, the Catholic Church has this Council of Trent in 1648. It was basically when the Catholics got together to reaffirm some of their most important beliefs, such as praying to saints, the importance of Mary, and the importance of the Pope and the bishops in the Catholic structure. But one thing they realized was that basically with Europe starting to split, they would need to find new converts and new people to follow Catholicism outside of Europe. One of the things they did was form this brotherhood known as the Jesuits. The point of the Jesuits was that they were supposed to spread Christianity outside of Europe as much as possible. Jesuit missionaries go to North and South America to convert natives. They create missions where natives will actually live, and they teach them how to be Catholics. The Jesuits also go to China and many other Asian countries and to Africa as well to try to convert as many people as possible. Because, once again, this idea of that, like, Protestants are now spreading their version of Christianity in Europe, Catholics thus need to start converting people outside of Europe as much as possible. That leads us actually to our overseas. That overseas Catholicism becomes much more important. That's why today the highest population of Catholics are in Latin America. Now, it's heavily thanks to the work of the Jesuits and other Catholic empires, such as the Spanish, who spent a lot of time trying to convert people to Catholicism. Cool, we're going to pause there. You're going to answer your second question, and then we're going to move on to our third section and fourth section. Whew.
Even the best fall down sometime. Even the wrong word.
Now, what is the differences between Catholicism and Protestantism? Lutheranism?
Yeah.
At the time, it was called Lutheranism. It was called Lutheranism.
No, Lutheran.
Oh my God,
No.
Lutheranism.
No.
Lutheranism.
Lutheran.
At the time, it was called Lutheranism. So Martin Luther's version of this council basically got together to reaffirm some of Catholicism's greatest beliefs. These words. God, I'm struggling with the Jesuits. Alright, so hypothetically, you have finished question 2. We're moving on to our third part, Islam. So we talked about this a little bit when we looked at gunpowder empires. But we're going to do a quick look at how Islam was also affected during period 4. So quick context, remember that Islam has 2 main branches. There are many others besides that, but 2 main ones, Sunni and Shia. Just a quick reminder, the Sunni-Shia split, which happened back when Islam was first created, after Muhammad died, is all about who should basically lead the faith after Muhammad. The Sunnis believed it could be basically anyone. Shias believed that it had to be someone directly related to him. What basically happened is that the Sunnis gained more followers than the Shia, but today the vast majority of Muslims are Sunni, while a minority are Shia. Now, even with this split happening, if you look throughout history, Sunnis and Shias lived in relative peace. They often prayed at the same mosques, even if one was created with Shias in mind or Sunnis in mind. They often visit the same important religious sites, and you would say that they didn't have any more conflict than, say, 2 different versions of Christianity or things like that. What truly changed the dynamic between Sunnis and Shias was in period 4 with the rise of the Ottomans and the Safavids. If you remember, the Ottomans were a Sunni majority country, and their leader, the Sultan, even named himself the protector of the Muslim faith. And the sword of Islam is one title he took. The idea being is that his whole goal was that he was going to spread Islam, but since he's a Sunni, it would be his version. What made this relationship different than previous history is the rise of the Safavids. The Safavids were the first Shia majority empire. And since you now have a Shia majority empire and a Sunni majority empire, this conflict that happened between them was only intensified by religious differences. More anger was created, more rivalry was created from the Ottomans and the Safavids constantly competing against each other. So I want to make sure we truly understand one of the big changes in Islam was the intensification and worsening of relations between Sunni and Shia versions of Islam because of the Ottomans and the Safavids, who each championed a different version. I'm going to pause here. You're going to answer question 3, and then we're going to move on to section 4. All right, our last section is about a new faith that is created during period 4, and that is Sikhism. Sikhism is one of the last major faiths that is created in India, which seems to be a hotbed of faith, right? India is the home of Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and now Sikhism. But with the rise of Sikhism in period 4, there's a quick remembrance we want to have about India. Remember India, even though I said there's many different versions of the faith, there are 2 faiths that dominate India. The first is Hinduism, which is by far the majority and the most followed faith in India. The second is Islam. Thanks to remember those Islamic Turkic people who moved and conquered within India and the formation of empires such as the Delhi Sultanate and the Mughal Empire, there is a spread, an increasing amount of Indians who follow Islam. Now, what happens is that Sikhism is created basically by taking parts of both Hinduism and Islam into this new faith. What I don't want you to say is that Sikhism is a mixture of Islam and Hinduism. That's not correct. But what Sikhism does is that it takes different versions of each faith and adds an on to this new faith that is created. So I'll give you some examples. Sikhism's main belief is that you, in your relationship to God, is heavily dependent on your own personal relationship. It's kind of similar to Protestantism in the way, in the idea that it's not about which person you listen to or what certain works or things that you follow. It's all about what relationship based on compassion that you have with God. Now, there are some specific beliefs that are used to target and get people to convert. For example, the idea of one God, monotheism, comes from Islam. And Sikhism itself is often very popular amongst the Hindu lower class because Sikhism is a faith that believes in equality of all people. Sikhism also is led by a series of religious leaders known as gurus, who each guru that takes over basically continues building the faith and the belief in being its champion. Sikhism is also famous that as a faith, its evolution comes with a lot of conflict. The Mughal Empire did not approve of Sikhism and often attacked it, and Hindus also have not had the best relationships with Sikhs. This has led Sikhs as a faith. One of their main beliefs is about defense of people. One tenet of their faith is that as a Sikh, you're supposed to defend and protect people who cannot protect themselves. And so their faith became famous for their warriors. Early on, every Sikh was allowed to carry a sword to defend people and those who cannot defend themselves, which today is now more like a ceremonial knife. But back then, the whole point of the faith was that it evolved to be this evolved to have a militaristic side to it that European empires would actually, such as the British, would take advantage later on. Cool, so that is our last faith, the Sikhs. One thing I want to make sure we headline about the Sikhs. Not a combination of Islam and Hinduism, but they do take traits from both and is able to convert people based on, one, its belief in one God, 2, its belief in equality, and one's personal relationship with God. Okay, go ahead and pause there, answer that last question. Make sure that you go and complete that document breakdown practice, and you turn in your lecture notes, and make sure you call or text if you have any questions or need any support. Visite out. Any words, Alyssa?
Nope.
Any words, Mika?
Nope.